So today we're going to break down a really fascinating and, yeah, pretty complex framework for how to handle modern political arguments. This whole idea comes directly from the source material. It's called mirroring, and it's really all about one thing: how to reclaim your most valuable, non-renewable resource, which is, of course, your time.
All right, let's dive right in. Here's our roadmap. First, we'll talk about a type of argument you literally can't win. Then, we'll get into the art of just disengaging. After that, we'll unpack the toolkit this framework gives you for spotting flawed logic. And believe me, it all leads to a pretty sobering conclusion at the end.
So let's kick things off with a problem, a frustration that I'm betting feels really familiar to a lot of us.
You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? That feeling? You're deep in it. You're going back and forth. You're laying out facts, but the conversation is just spinning its wheels, going absolutely nowhere. Well, according to this framework, these arguments aren't just frustrating. They are actively stealing your time, and that is the one resource you can never, ever get back. The source material has this really unique name for these time thieves: mirrored non-playable characters, or MNPCs. The analogy here is straight out of a video game. You know, they're like those background characters that are just stuck on a loop, repeating the same irrational points over and over. And it feels like their only real function is to drain your energy and, you guessed it, waste your time. Okay, so if these arguments are totally unwinnable, then what in the world are you supposed to do? Well, that brings us to the proposed solution: the art of disengaging. And that solution is mirroring. It's really a total shift in your mindset. See, the goal isn't to win the debate or change somebody's mind. The goal is to simply recognize when a conversation has gone off the rails into irrationality, and then to strategically and intentionally disengage. It's all about preservation, not persuasion. This action, this conscious choice, actually has a name: reclaiming our time, or ROT for short. And get this, the source material notes that this was directly inspired by Representative Maxine Waters. It's that deliberate decision to step away from what the source calls the corrosive blot in politics, and instead point your time and energy towards something that's actually worthwhile. Now, mirroring isn't just about turning around and walking away. It actually gives you a whole toolkit to help you figure out why an argument is unproductive in the first place. And the first set of tools is all about spotting when history is being misused. First up, we've got something called additive history. This is what happens when someone throws in a false or totally inaccurate historical claim just to add weight to their argument. You can think of it like they're trying to give themselves a history bonus in the middle of the debate, just to try and shut their opponent down. And the flip side of that coin? That's retributive history. Now, with this one, historical events are used not just to add some weight, but to actually demand some kind of punishment, or, as the source puts it, a retribution fee in the present for sins of the past. So you can see the two very different goals here, right? One is trying to get an advantage, the other is trying to inflict a punishment. But what's really fascinating, according to the source, is that they're both powered by the exact same engine, something it calls the Acontextual Imperative. So what on earth is that? Well, the acontextual imperative is when a past event is just completely ripped out of its context and then used to create an irrational order, a command, to do something in the present. It's basically a command that's disguised as a quick history lesson, and that's a huge red flag. So to defend against this, the framework suggests using a mechanism called Groundhog Scrutiny. It's basically a 3-level filter you run these historical comparisons through. First, you just reject any basic fallacies right off the bat. Then, you look really closely for weak or irrelevant connections. And finally, you apply strict scrutiny, which demands that the comparison has to be absolutely airtight in its logic. But the toolkit doesn't just stop with history. Nope. Now we're going to look at how it helps you identify flawed arguments that use symbols, social bubbles, and even projections of the future. First, let's talk about historical totems, or HITs for short. These can be physical objects, like statues or flags, but they can also be ideas or even phrases. Their real purpose isn't to make an argument, it's to act as a shield. They're meant to be accepted without any questions, effectively blocking any rational counterargument from even starting. Okay, get ready for this next term. It is a mouthful. For the huge emotional release that comes after these totems get destroyed, the source material actually calls it a totemic purgalgasm. The point it's making is that the act of destruction is often way more about a psychological purge for the people doing it than it is about actually changing anything in reality.
And to protect these totems and their approved stories, the source says people build these ideological bubbles called historical safe spaces, or a HIS. You can think of them like an onion, built in layers. It starts with an outer circle of just an agreeable environment. Then it filters for shared beliefs in the middle. And finally, it has this inner core that strictly enforces one single historical narrative. The whole point is to prevent debate, not to encourage it.
And what about arguments that are all about the future? Well, the source gives us this equation for what it calls a mirror future. It's basically an irrational projection that's built on an impossible goal, powered by that same acontextual command from the past, and tied to a complaint that has no real, workable solution. It's just a recipe for a completely pointless discussion. And that brings us to the final, and honestly, maybe the most challenging concept in this whole mirroring philosophy. It's a pretty melancholic take on the limits of a rational argument.
It's called Cassandrism. It's named after the mythical prophetess of Troy who was cursed by the gods to give true prophecies that nobody would ever believe. It's this idea that mirrors, the people armed with rational analysis, are often just doomed to have their accurate warnings completely ignored by people who are committed to being irrational. So all of this leads to one final, really crucial question. If you're cursed to be right but always ignored, what's the point of even engaging at all? And that's a provocative thought, isn't it? It gets right to the very heart of this philosophy. Maybe the real victory isn't about convincing other people. Maybe it's just about preserving your own time and your own rationality.